Dobrý večer, přeji.
Good evening. I guess you have heard an extremely interesting lecture by Mr. Bednařík. And what were the highlights or the most important aspects of his lecture? Ever since 50s in Olomouc, cannabis was used, which is now used industrial cannabis. I don't call it cannabis or recreational. I don't distinguish it because it's simply cannabis, and it only differs in the ratio of the contained components. And we used to use this industrial cannabis that used to be used for fiber, and Mr. Bednařík has excellently actually talked about the challenge of high cannabinoid contents, cannabis growing over or after several years of his activities. He did come to the conclusion he could help not only people but pet patients as well. So, you know, the fact that somebody calls it hemp is canopy such as, but they refer to low cannabinoids cannabis. And it doesn't mean it's no good, because even low concentrations mean effect. In Tel Aviv, there was some study on low THC and yet high therapeutic effect. I shall split my presentation into several parts. First, I will illustrate or talk about the basics, and then I will talk about what we can use to treat patients differ. And what may help one doesn't necessarily have to help another, and the dose which is inadequate, insufficient for one person may be excessive for another person. Simply, we are different, and different types of cannabis also are fit for different patients and different conditions. So I call it all cannabis. As I've said, I don't distinguish it, because what we call medical cannabis in majority of cases, the strains of varieties bred for recreational use are now used for, that means to be smoked. And now it's used for medical purposes or medical use, which is why I just call it hemp. Simply, I just call it cannabis, konopí in Czech, regardless of the use. So this is just to cast some light on it. Cannabidiol is very much celebrated now, but I remember the days when everyone insisted on THC only, and even though I said we used to treat people with the cannabidiol-based cannabis, they couldn't care less. Then all of a sudden they have rediscovered America, what I used to tell them for years. They all of a sudden are recognized as well. I'm not going to go through the whole history. Mr. Dabarov already talked about the fact that over 5,000 years it has been used in medicine. And we do have proofs from China that in graves, shoes were found made of cannabis paper. It was used ma, which is the Chinese name. That is two plants under that kind of ceiling, and it suggests its dicotyledonous nature. It for 1,000 years or archaeologists have actually dug up and discovered the pharmacopoeia on slates, and when the experts looked at it, they realized all kinds of names were used for cannabis, like Boguru and Gurguru, when cannabis ropes or cordages in water, it does not deteriorate, salt doesn't damage it. Then it was called Kunabu, when during all kinds of religious rites it was referred to it. Then Kunabu was this. Azala means hand of a ghost. Obviously, it suggests some neurological disorders, and then Ganzigunu, which we can consider to be the drug with or cannabimimetic nature properties, and then it was to be a drug that will literally tear out the soul of your body. Let me talk about Bethlehem town, which is about 20 kilometers away from Jerusalem, where a grave was found of a young girl with her. They found the skeleton of her daughter that was not unborn, and they found some carbonized or ossificated material. Obviously, she couldn't give birth or labor, and obviously she suffered from some bleeding or what. Oh, this was found only following the tests or analyses. They've sent the carbonized material, which you can see here, to our laboratory. We have put it to tests, and we found delta-8 THC. You know that in cannabis it's a delta-9. So here the bond is to the right, while here it is on the left, or what? It's a highly stable component or substance, 10 times potent, more potent, and it had survived or was preserved over the period of 1,600 years in the earth. Obviously, the girl was administered some stuff or drug to mitigate or alleviate the pain she suffered during or prior to the labor. That's it. As far as history goes, I don't want to elaborate on that. Well, it's me there as well. I started working with cannabis in 60. I was a youngster then, but the two main persons are Professor Kabelik, an important celebrity literally in medicine, and Professor Zdeněk Krejčí. And Kabelik, Mr. Krejčík, studied the antibiotic effects of high plants. And when he got to study cannabis, he saw the fantastic antimicrobial effect. This was in 1950. Therefore, they started to further explore it. Professor Krejčí obviously focused on it. His diploma work or thesis was on the effects on gram-positive microorganisms, including a series of pathogenic microbes. And then this was tested in many clinical fields like gynecology, dermatology, stomatology, and otorhinolaryngology, which all was published then in the month of December 1954. There was the first conference held called cannabis, medical cannabis, simply medical cannabis. So in the 1950s already, at the medical faculty of Olomouc, university, this has been traditionally held. And in those hospitals there, cannabis used to be administered naturally. The depth of knowledge was not such. It all focused on the antimicrobial effect. I worked there for 20 years. So marginally, so to say, I did prepare extracts for the pharmacies, which we nowadays call cannabis extract or Rexensong oil or Phoenix tears, etc. But that is made by means of organic solvent. And that used to be used or administered in this Olomouc hospital then already. And when then they got in touch with Professor Shantavi and found out about the cannabidiol acid being the active ingredient or substance. That was the first compound isolated. Cannabidiol was the only one isolated or identified prior to that. And these are acids that are decarbonized and then to get rid of the acid and become the CBDs, and then you know that all the other acids are subject to this decarboxylation process. These are the university manuscripts or acta from when on the 10th of December 1954, the first scientific conference, medical cannabis or cannabis as a medicine product was held. Unfortunately, when I left for Israel, that was for 1 year, and I've stayed ever since. Cannabis has been prohibited or has become a banned substance, banned drug now. For 4 years it has been illegal, but it is no more used for treatment. 2 weeks ago I was in Uruguay. I delivered lectures there. You know, in Uruguay this is illegal, but there is a minor hitch. They have no cannabis. So it's just like, patients wait, everything has been legalized, but they don't have the source, or simply they don't have the substance as such. So these are urgent issues or problems. And as has been said by Mr. Meislich, patient cannot wait until, they give him a license or approval. Patient needs it immediately. So cannabidiol is the substance that you get after the heating of the cannabidiol acid. It is one of the very popular substances which is non-psychoactive, which is legal, antipsychotic effects it has, and that we have studied years ago. We actually grew South African cannabis, and there was no cannabidiol or cannabidiol acid. This was in 1975 then, and the same finding was that of the French. And in 1983, somebody published the information that in South Africa, the content is much higher than anywhere else in the world, or in those varieties grown elsewhere. So patients using this obviously use cannabis with no cannabidiol. And the antipsychotic effects were only discovered later. I've got one more picture here from a material published last year in December in China. they unearthed lots of graves where they found or find actually cannabis. Here they realized that 13 or 14 plants from the tops down to the roots covered a body of a dead person. Why was that done? Nobody knows, whether for religious, recreational, medicinal reasons. Perhaps he was some shaman. Was extremely interesting. This is Professor Shandavi again, an outstanding expert. He did not only focus on cannabis explorations, but independently of Professor Mushalan, he discovered independently all the compounds in Olomouc. And when this was published, or when he published a paper on that, on the structure of cannabidiol compounds, etc., he referred to Professor Mushalan. They exchange information, so to say, and when Professor Misholam publishes a work or paper, then he would refer to the same conclusions arrived at by Professor Shantavi. So this was in 1963 submitted, and Professor Shantavi wrote the article in the English language, but since it was in the Acta Universitati, it is not widespread abroad. I know that in Olomouc they've been very successful and advanced in this respect. Roger Adams was yet another important person or expert. Professor Adams contributed to this very. And double bond was the discoverers Professor Meshulam and Shantavi. Shantavi then discovered this absolute configuration, which means the full structure. Meshulam published in the notes that we've been informed by Professor Shantavi the arrival to the same conclusion. So what happens commonly is that independently there are the same conclusions or discoveries made in different parts of the world. Roger Adams again in the 1940s discovered the structure, but he wasn't unaware of the side of this double bond. That was done by Shantavi and Meshulam, but Shantavi also, as I've said, determine this absolute configuration, that is the structure of cannabinoid compound. No, these are the four actors: Roger Adams, Shantavi, and Meshulam. And perhaps you will know that the basic substance in cannabis made of terpenes is the cannabidiol acid, CBGA, and then CBCA, and other acids are actually formed, which then decarboxylate to acid-free substances. In this biogenetic series, that means in the nature, there is no correlation between THC and CBG. I mean, you can transfer the THC into CBG is impossible. And the other, well, you can't do this back at home. You can only do it in laboratories. This is the decarboxylation system. That means acid and CO2 which is released and leads to the formation of the substance that is that important in cancer treatment, because it has anti-carcinogenic effects like THC. But once we knew the substances and we knew their effects, the scientists wanted to know the effects on the body. Therefore, the cannabinoid receptors were discovered first in the brain, which was called central. Now it's called CB1 receptor. And later in the immune system, the CB2 receptor was discovered, which used to be called peripheral, now is simply CB2 receptor. When you look at the cannabinoid receptors at the time of their discovery, the scientists tried to identify the amounts, and in different parts of the brain, obviously, the amounts or content differs. The valid such as that in basal ganglia, these are placed for motor regulation or hippocampus, learning, memory, stress, cerebral cortex, etc. Where you look at the functions, it will correspond with the effects of cannabis in case of recreational users. In other words, it will affect the referred to centers or parts of the brain. Therefore, you can, so to say, map or explain the individual responses or effects. If you look at CB1, it is especially placed in the cortex, and then that means hippocampus, basal ganglia, cerebellum, then reproduction system. And it is important for reproduction, for offsprings. And the peripheral, that is CB2 receptors, are predominantly in lymphatic organs, that means spleen, tymphus, tonsils, leukocytes, then pancreas and microphages. And if you look at the release...
Ano, CB2 je hlavně ve...
CB2 is mainly in spleen, but in Langerhans Islands you have both CB1 and CB2 receptor. And Langerhans Islands, you would remember it from your primary school, namely that's something related to diabetes. And that explains also, once we have both CB1 and CB2 receptors, why cannabis is so efficacious for diabetes, and that it is a good therapy. And once we knew the receptors, then it was obvious to everybody that the receptors are not in the body waiting for you to digest cannabis. The objective was to find why the receptors are there and what sort of substances they are. And there was a lucky coincidence that together with Mr. Meshulam, we were pen friends for 16 years. And when in November 1989, communism was over here, then in February following year, he invited me to Israel. And in autumn, I was there, perhaps the first Czechoslovak citizens. Today you have plenty of Czech tourists there. And I believe that I will continue my research in cannabis. And he says no. I have brought the discoverer of the receptor, Mr. Devane, molecular pharmacologist, and your objective is to find in the brain substance which binds to these cannabinoid receptors. And I was quite shocked. I thought, no way, we know nothing about it. But we worked hard with Bill, and a year later we were still nowhere. So we thought, what should we do? Professor Meshulam said, I know it takes a long time and it's quite costly. We may perhaps forget about it, but we convinced him that we know something and that we should continue. And 6 months later, we were lucky. Because I had this substance, it was in March 92, and we called it anandamide, based on Sanskrit word for ananda, which means internal happiness, and amide, or amide, because it is arachidoethanol amide. So we knew that this would be that efficacy and, of course, joy of the discovery, because you can be happy for your own achievements and not just for taking a drug. Because if you are tired and you come home from work or from a football match and you, so to say, lay down, you have a very pleasant sensation because you are in a stress and you had plenty of and the body starts producing anti-stress substances in order for you to relax. We called it the good, how would I say, you feel well because you feel that you have done good piece of work. Interesting is that to the same receptors we would have substances from tetrahydral cannabis and endocannabinoids. They all bind to it, anandamide, and they bind to the same locations in the brain, to the same receptors. And interesting is that the bind was equally efficient. It was about 40 nanomoles. So that was challenging and interesting, and it explained plenty. And after 1992, there was this explosion, namely everybody in the world would like to do research in cannabis, and we are just the tiny little ones behind. Everybody wants to be the leading expert, and everybody would like to have and has the best laboratory. You may be laughing, but really everybody says we are the best ones, we can do it better than anybody else. We never believed it was our story. We knew that we were just a tiny group, and for cannabis to be used for treatment as requested would take plenty of more work. So physiological systems which influence endocannabinoids are plentiful. You can see them, and if you read them, I don't have to read it for you, you can see that this is impact of digestion of cannabis. So cannabis really simulates the effect of endogenous ligands, which we called endocannabinoids. And the situation is that the endocannabinoid system must be balanced, and if there is a disbalance, then you fall ill, and the body tries to heal and restore the balance. And if the body is unable to do it, is not strong enough, and we add cannabinoids, that's to say, administer cannabinoids as therapy, we restore the balance. This is nothing new. You can see Fisher in 1894 had the same idea, namely that the receptors and ligands work like a lock and key. So the key can be tetrahydrocannabinol from the cannabis or anandamide from brain, and if it fits the lock, CB1 or CB2, then you would have a whole series of mechanisms who start healing the body. And we know a lot about it, but it's true that we should know much more, because there are many more keys for the lock that we know nothing about. So let's not feel that we have reached the target. So binding of endocannabinoids to the receptors is called synaptic transmission. It's transfer of information from one cell to another. I could explain it in scientific terms, but I will perhaps show you a picture, much easier. Two nerve cells, and there you have synapses. And this is where you have transmission of the information. It's chemical transmission using chemical substances. And even better here, you have axon and dendrite. How it starts. First, there is this action potential, which is nerve impulse, which must be triggered by the body. And once the nerve impulse is given, what follows is presynaptic vesicle. Imagine it as a bag or envelope containing some substance. And it is here where, through synaptic gap, you have the synaptic the bag entered, and you have synthesis of the endocannabinoid or anandide. And once it is synthesized, it's stored here, and here we have receptors. This is the receptor, the cannabinoid receptor, and from the storage it is released and is bound to the receptor. And once the binding is done, it triggers the activity in the body, therapeutical or pleasant for recreational users, or for those who took overdose too, very unpleasant but not threatening to life. And even recreational users would then call for medical emergency because they are afraid for their life, although their life is not at threat. And if not everything from this warehouse is used, the body would return the endocannabinoids and store them again for potential future use. Or they are metabolized to other substances. Anandamide can be metabolized into arachidonic acid, etc. So that's about the mechanism. So that was anandamide. And the second substance which we discovered, arachidinoglycerol. It's an ester, as you can see. So that was second type of substance. And these two substances are intensively studied worldwide. We found 5 of them altogether. I isolated 4. Dr. and Shabat isolated arachidinoglycerol. And although this substance is most active, only anandamide and arachidinoglycerol are studied because they were, so to say, discovered first. So we have plenty of such substances today. And in Italian, scientist Vincenzo Di Marzo said that endocannabinoids mean have a rest, eat, sleep, forget about it, protect yourself. So this is the post-traumatic syndrome of soldiers or women after rape or people who survived car accidents. This is exactly, forget about it, don't think about it. Cannabis helps you to forget about the problem. You are having a rest, you sleep well, you wake up fresh in the morning, and that we know is always good. Cannabis is a wonderful medicine, but I always emphasize it wouldn't always cure you, it wouldn't cure everybody, it can't cure every disease and can't cure every stage of the disease. It's wonderful, but we can't give false hopes to the patient. If you really want to heal or treat the patient, you must tell him about the risks. Could be that he would be the one who wouldn't be cured. Some will be cured, the others would have their condition improved. Based on our Israeli experience, official, legal therapy is used only as palliation. As you say, it reduces symptoms of the disease, but the disease progresses and deteriorates. Only the patient has no symptoms and may present as healthy, which is a positive impact upon the patient, upon his friends, his family. So it simply helps many people, but the disease is there. and develops. So about 10% of patients terminate cannabis treatment because it didn't help, or they objected to it. Not everybody is healed. And here you have side impacts. But talking about side effects of cannabis, don't forget that if you take a medicine, the important thing is that the positive impact should be greater than negative ones, which works well for cannabis. You can see that you have common impacts such as dizziness, dry mouth, or less frequent, again a whole list of them. But I can tell you that the side effect compared with legal drugs would never be more preponderant than negative impact, because many legal drugs that may lead to invalidity of patients, chemotherapy for instance. Successful are those patients who have resistance. Those who are resistant won't die of cancer but of the chemotherapy. Cannabis cannot save everybody, and the therapy, which is very difficult indeed, requires one more thing. The patient must be positive and believe that he will heal. If he feels that he will die anyway, he will. The positive thinking, your faith healed you, that's not just a phrase. People who believed they would survive, they did survive. For instance, Jews in concentration camps. I see it in Israel. Those who were placed in concentration camps and survived and live today are nearly 100 years old, and you know under what conditions they lived. But these were people who believed that they would survive, and they did. So faith is extremely important even for therapy. Now let's have a look at how we humans struggle with cannabis. We want to develop medicines which may be based on cannabis, but will generate income. You can't patent your cannabis, but if you create a drug such as Sativex, all right, it's just tetrahydrocannabidiol or cannabidiol mix 1:1 or 1.1:1 ratio, and you can see multiple sclerosis, potpura, the painkiller, neuropathic disease, pain, the arthritis, etc. That's quite expensive. I think it would cost you 1,400 crowns. Or 14,000 crowns in Czech Republic. But so if you are a retired person with 9,000 crowns a month, you can't have it. So they call it the cannabis granny. Madame Pushkova prepared her own the Sativex. Easy to make. So here we didn't win over nature. Nature was the winner because it was natural. Dronabinol, marinol, or Syndros. Again, this is used in therapy. It's tetrahydrocannabinol isolated from cannabis. And if it is isolated and you give it a nice catchy name, then it generates more money compared with the substance in plant material only. So again, it's a natural substance and it is the winner. And as for cannabidiol, that's really if we however say Epidiolex, well, you have to pay for that because that's medicine. Although it's isolated from a cannabis, and many isolate cannabidiol, pure cannabidiol, but if you then call it Epidiolex, it generates income. Again, we didn't win. Again, this is a natural substance, not something that we invented. The nature invented it. However, let's see what men can develop. Nabilon. Again, vomiting of patients who are on chemotherapy. This is substance on the basis of tetrahydrocannabinol, but instead of, we have dimethylheptyl here, and dimethylheptyl was discovered by Roger Adams, American, in the 90s. If it is dimethylheptyl instead of pentyl, the chain would be much more efficient. And instead of methyl, he has a ketone group, and you can see it was modified slightly, but still it is a natural substance, another substance. And again, it has no links with natural substance, rimonabant. It was hoped to be a success story for obese patients. And I think best the therapy for obese people is less food, more movement. My friend would be more vulgar here. He would say, eat less and defect more, or excrement more. Because there are many undisciplined people who really love eating. They can't even move as full as they are, and they want a pill, to slim them. And what appeared? Rimonabant structure has nothing in common with cannabinoid substances. The patients had depressions, and some of them, well, an obese person is a patient because this is a disease. So some of the obese people had depression so severe that they committed suicide. So a year later, the drug was withdrawn. Taranabant, that was another drug against obesity. And that, of course, was studied in depth, but was never used in practice. Dexanabinol, that substance derived, again, from delta-8 tetrahydrocannabinol. You have methylhydroxylized and something else there. So neuroprotective substance. It was experimented with but never used. And agulamic acid, which again, you see, is derived of delta-8 tetrahydrocannabinol, carboxynolized, and instead of, again, you have a replacement here, administered to the sclerosis multiplex, but never used. Now, cannabinol, which reminds us of some of the cannabinoids, but this drug again was never released. And this is a substance which we found to be very active only on CB2 receptors. And we discovered this by accident, really. One scientific researcher in our laboratory synthesized something, and it didn't work as he expected. He got this substance, and I said, let me experiment with it. It didn't have any active bond to the brain receptor, so I tried it with CB2 peripheral. It was very active. They investigated it, and they said it would be efficient, but again, never was used. And HU331, if it's a Hebrew University acronym, really, 331. So again, it's similar to cannabinoids, more prospective, and again, was to be used, has never been used. So nature was the winner. The substances which are used are natural substances, only we've cleaned them or purified them. But what I wanted was to say that it is not about cannabinol and DrSc. We have 104 cannabinoid substances, but more than 1,300 substances identified in cannabis, not in one variety, in all sorts of varieties, in some total over 1,300. And it was proved that if a patient was on therapy and cannabis had some content of CBD and THC from two varieties where the ratio of the substances was the same, one mix cured the patient, while the second variety did not cure the same patient. So it is not up to these two substances. Many other substances might be at play. So we started to study it, and I would like to cover other substances. Terpenes and terpenoids. These are substances derived from plants, in whose structure you have the carbon and hydrogen. If you have oxygen or nitrogen, you call it terpenoid. And you can see that, that they have a whole list of effects against cancer and antioxidants as well.
We have monoterpenes. The main is representative in cannabis is alpha, pinene, or myrcene. And you have monoterpene until the minute number 15 or what, that's the retention time, and then myrcene, which is monoterpene. Then we have sesquiterpenes. That means beta, caryophyllene, and LMN. Caryophyllene is the only one that binds to cannabinoid receptors, CB2, selectively. And if you look at terpenes, obviously caryophyllene, that means sesquiterpenes prevail. But you also have such strains with high terpenes as well as high sesquiterpenes. All that can impact the treatment of the patient. When you look at different monoterpenes, look at that, alpha-pinene, antibacterial, beta-pinene, antiseptic, anti-inflammatory, etc. If you look at all the others, myrcene, limonene, philandren, well, look at the anti-carcinogenic, anti-inflammatory, antipsychotic effects. Obviously, myrcene is very significant. Limonene, antispastic, anti-proliferative, antimicrobial, philandrin, which is against digestive disorders, anti-mycotic effects, and cardiovascular, that is CAMPHEN, cardiovascular diseases. So it's not only cannabinoids, but terpenes and terpenoids, which are essential. Lina, Lola, alpha-terpene, again, anti-tumor or tumor, so to say, reducing effect. Well, obviously there are many other substances that show anti-carcinogenic effects. And looking at sesquiterpenes, again, beta caryophyllene is to be used against cancer, humulin against tumors, antibacterial. Caryophyllene oxide is an interesting substance because it's fully legal. But if you want to damage someone, then spray it, or pollute, put it on a person's trousers. And in the US, he will be immediately arrested as a drug addict. The dogs are actually trained to detect this caryophyllene, which is a typical substance in cannabis contained. So if you have caryophyllene oxide on you, on your clothes or whatever, you may get in a bit trouble. Polyphenols, again, or ellagic acid, which shows antioxidant qualities, then ferulic, caffeic, curcumeric, all those acids. These are protocatechonic. These are substances that we have to use. You have to identify as many and detect as many as possible, and then we will be able to tailor-make it to the patient's need. Hydroxide benzoic, gallic, or what? Gallic acid, again, anti-tumor, anti-asthmatic, anti-ulceric, etc. So I want you to know that chlorogenic acid is also very effective against cancer. Now, natural antioxidant and transcaffeoletramine antioxidants are also very useful. Cannabicin, B, natural antioxidant complex molecule with anti-carcinogenic properties. Flavonoids are also crucial. When you look at the pharmacological effects or properties, again, they act against allergies, cancer, antidiarrheal, anti-inflammatory, God knows what. So flavonoids are very beneficial. Camphorol, anti-cancerogenic, it regulates the DNA methylation, which is the issue in case of cancer. Since DNA methylation is not correct, and by means of cannabis, you can reverse this using cannabidiol. That was covered in or published in literature. Cannabidiol actually helps recover the proper DNA methylation. There are many diseases fully dependent on DNA methylation. Apart from flavonoids, we also have flavonoid glycosides, antioxidants, antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, anti-carcinogenic. And when you look at them, it's their structure is flavonoid and sugar. Glucoside, I didn't write down the properties or effects because we had it and heard it before. But camphorol, glucoside, diglucoside, in order for you to see the chemical structure, to analyze this and quantify it strain by strain would be a challenge. It's extremely difficult, but the point is, or effort is, to achieve the best of result or effect for each and every patient. Camphorol, rhamnosid, and cannabis also helps as orphan drug or acts as an orphan drug. What is an orphan drug? It's a drug for rare diseases or where there is no other drug or medicine for treatment available. It was actually once discovered in the US when cannabis with cannabidiol helped cure her. And that was no new thing, no discovery of America. St. Moshua 35 years ago already, together with someone in Brazil, did experiment with cannabidiol in epileptics or epileptic patients. Nobody, however, was impressed. Nobody cared. Simply people couldn't care less. That's how things got neglected, or now Tourette syndrome and some other congenital or other diseases or disorders that can be very much helped with cannabis. Recently, two scientists in the National Institute of Health and Drug Abuse wrote of Alcohol Abuse, National Institute of Alcohol Abuse, wrote a paper, namely George Hanuš and Paul Pacher, both of them being medical doctors. Pacher is a cardiologist, and they claim that soon enough, perhaps all the diseases will be treated by means of cannabis, but they supported by a number of in vitro and in vivo works in animals. We are no animals, sure, but it is justified because cannabinoid receptors are one of the most widespread receptors in human body. They are all over the place, which is why cannabis seems to act as a panacea, but not always, not with each and every patient or at each and every stage. We have to stress the importance of this medicine, but we shouldn't exaggerate it. People might get disenchanted or disappointed then if it fails to help. One German doctor, Grottenhammon, wrote all the indications, or wrote down a list of indications, allergy, asthma, autism, or whatever, pharospasm, then borderline personality disorders. That's just page 1. And if we continue, and you can read second and third page of all the disorders or diseases, you can use it or administer it. Well, I'm not going to read it all. I'm not going to talk about it all. I just wish to highlight the huge or high number of diseases and disorders it can help with. Israel. This is roughly 10 years ago, or when we all started in 1915, we had 5,000 patients only. Then we had 11,000 patients. 2 years later, we had 23 patients. Now we have over 30,000 patients being treated. The number will keep growing, and yet it is not, so to say, we don't have staff enough. There are patients waiting for the license or approval. The terminal stage or terminal patients will be administered or allowed to use cannabis, but all the others have to take or use all the other medicines, and only once everything fails, they are free to get cannabis. Israel is no paradise. Yes, the standard is high of this treatment, but it's not yet, it hasn't as yet reached the situation with medicinal cannabis, the desired stage or situation. Now only if it's proven that a person fails to respond to other treatments or drugs, nobody could care. You have to have, nobody could care less. You have to have a scientific or opinion and proof. Upon the approval of a specialist and upon permit from the ministry, patient can contact the grower. We have got 8 licenses, and the grower instructs the patient, gives him the cannabis. It's for free in Israel. I think I said that. He only pays handling fee of 370 shekel or what, which is roughly 10% of a low pension. It's like if, let's say, you have 9,000 crowns of old age pension, it would be 900. That would be acceptable, wouldn't it? Whether he gets 20 grams or 200 grams, the fee is identical. It's the same. What is the advantage? If it fails to help, the patient will come to the grower and will notify him, will tell him, and then he can adjust the strain or variety to the patient's needs or condition. In the future, pharmacies will dispense it with only high THC or CBD or 50-50, 1-to-1 ratio. And we did the variety of strain will be mentioned, or the label simply will be referred to. So then the pharmacy will not be obliged to adjust the variety of strain. There are pros and cons to every solution. I don't know whether this will be ideal for the authorities involved. It will, of course, all the stakeholders, it'll be easier. Now, as to the compounds, as of the 1st of October 2016, there were 1,362 compounds or components, of which 144 were cannabinoids, even though acids haven't been isolated, and there are many more cannabinoid acids. So this is to. In conclusion, as to the development in 1840, there was one work or one paper published only, starting with 98. I mean, that was prior to. There were less or fewer publications than 100 until 1963, which was the THC discovery year. Then there were up to 500 papers published, and in 92, with RNDr discovery, it just rocketed. The number soared of papers published. Obviously, all these discoveries or findings are of major significance. Thank you very much.